a WikiVidi documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. George Washington. George Washington was one of the founding fathers of the United States and served as the nation's first president. In the American Revolutionary War, General Washington led Patriot forces to victory over the British and their allies. He presided at the Constitutional Convention of 1787, which established the new federal government, and he has been called the father of his country. Washington was born to a moderately prosperous Virginian family of colonial planters and slaveholders. He had early educational opportunities, learned mathematics, and soon launched a successful career as a surveyor, which enabled him to make significant land investments. He then joined the Virginia militia and fought in the French and Indian War. He was appointed commander-in-chief of the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War, leading an Allied campaign to victory at the Siege of Yorktown, which ended the war. His devotion to Republicanism and revulsion for tyrannical power impelled him to decline further authority after victory, and he resigned as commander-in-chief in 1783. As the country's premier statesman, Washington was unanimously elected president by the Electoral College in the first two national elections. He promoted and oversaw implementation of a strong, well-financed national government, using the economic plans of his Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton, while remaining impartial in the fierce rivalry between Hamilton and Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson. When the French Revolution plunged Europe into war, Washington assumed a policy of neutrality to protect American ships, while the controversial Jay Treaty of 1795 normalized trade relations with Great Britain. He set numerous precedents that have endured, such as the Cabinet Advisory System, the inaugural address, and the title, Mr. President. His seminal farewell address strongly warned against political partisanship, sectionalism, and involvement in foreign wars. In his retirement, Washington was appointed by President John Adams to serve as Lieutenant General of a provisional army during the Quasi-War with France. Washington owned slaves throughout his life from age 11, but he became increasingly troubled by slavery and freed his slaves in his will. He was a member of the Anglican Church and the Freemasons, and he urged tolerance for all religions in his roles as general and president. Upon his death, he was famously eulogized as first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen. Washington has been widely memorialized by monuments, art, places, stamps and currency, and he has been ranked by scholars among the top 4 American presidents. Early years. George Washington was born February 22, 1732, the first child of Augustine Washington and his wife Mary Ball Washington, at Wakefield on their Pope's Creek estate in the colony of Virginia. He was a subject of the British Empire at that time, under the reign of George II, descended primarily from the gentry of Sulgrave, England. His great-grandfather John Washington emigrated to Virginia in 1656. He was a tobacco planter who accumulated land and slaves, as did his son Lawrence and his grandson Augustine. Washington was reared in the rich open farmlands of Virginia's Tidewater region. His father Augustine was a moderately wealthy planter, justice of the peace, and county sheriff who had 10 children, 4 by his first marriage to Jane Butler and 6 by his second marriage to Mary. Washington was one of 7 surviving children, older half-brothers Lawrence and Augustine, and full siblings Samuel, Elizabeth, John Augustine, and Charles. At age 3, Washington and his family moved to Epswasson, a 2,500-acre plantation which his father purchased on the bluffs of the Potomac River, and they moved to Ferry Farm near Fredericksburg when Washington was 6. He spent much of his boyhood there, and it is said to be the location of the Parson Weems cherry tree legend. Washington's father died at age 48 of a sudden illness on April 12, 1743, when George was 11, and he was then kept under the strict care of his mother Mary. His older half-brother Lawrence inherited Epswasson and changed the name to Mount Vernon in honor of British Vice Admiral Edward Vernon, his commander during the War of Jenkins' Ear, while Washington inherited Ferry Farm and 10 slaves. Washington's total education spanned over 8 years, and he was initially taught by his father and Lawrence. He did not attend England's Appleby Grammar School because his mother could not afford the cost, so he was tutored by various masters including Mr. Hobby, his father's former tenant. He also attended the Fredericksburg School of Anglican clergyman James Myray. He was taught mathematics, trigonometry, and surveying by schoolmaster Henry Williams, and he had a natural talent in draftsmanship and map-making. He purchased books on military affairs, agriculture, and history, as well as popular novels. By early adulthood, he was able to write with precision and considerable force. Washington's mother rejected a plan for him to join the Royal Navy in September 1746 when he was 14. His half-brother Lawrence had married Anne Fairfax, the daughter of powerful Virginia statesman William Fairfax, in 1743, and he became Washington's idolized surrogate father. Washington moved to Mount Vernon with Lawrence and Anne when he was 17. Washington was close friends with William Fairfax's son George, whose wife Sally had been an early romantic interest. She maintained correspondence with Washington when she moved to England with her father. Washington and George William Fairfax accompanied surveyor James Jan in 1748 when Washington was 16. Jan had been sent out by Lord Fairfax to survey the Shenandoah lands, and Washington gained valuable experience during the month-long trip. He received a commission and surveyor's license from the College of William and Mary in 1749 when he was 17, and he was appointed surveyor of Culpeper, Virginia due to Fairfax's influence. He primarily surveyed for Lord Fairfax in the Blue Ridge Mountains. After a preliminary survey of eastern Culpeper County, he made repeated surveys of the Shenandoah Valley during the spring of 1750, and he became accustomed to the wilderness. He bought almost 1,500 acres in the Shenandoah Valley in October 1750, his first large land investment, and he accumulated 2,315 acres in the Shenandoah Valley by the time he was 18, when he resigned his commission of Culpeper County surveyor. Washington stopped surveying within a few years, but he continued purchasing land. He acquired more than 70,000 acres in 7 states and the District of Columbia over the course of his lifetime. It took him 25 years to expand his Mount Vernon estate from 2,000 to 8,000 acres. He bought more parcels of land to spur development around Federal City. Rather than selling multiple lots to large investors, he sold individual lots to middle-income investors, believing that they were more likely to make committed improvements. In 1751, Washington made his only trip abroad with Lawrence to Barbados in the hope that the climate would be beneficial to his brother's tuberculosis. During the trip, Washington contracted smallpox which immunized him, but left his face slightly scarred. Lawrence's health continued to decline and he returned to Mount Vernon, where he died on July 26, 1752. Washington inherited his Mount Vernon estate after the deaths of Lawrence's wife Anne and their daughter. Personal life. Washington was generally reserved and somewhat taciturn, yet he had a strong presence among company. He made speeches and announcements when required, but he was not known as an orator or a debater. He was taller than most of his contemporaries. Accounts of his height vary from 6 feet to 6 feet tall, and he weighed between 210–220 pounds as an adult. He had wide hips, a slim waist, a broad chest, narrow shoulders, muscular thighs, and exceptionally large hands, and he was widely known for his great strength, particularly in his long arms. He had piercing grey-blue eyes, fair skin, and light reddish-brown hair, although he wore his hair powdered in the fashion of the day. He had a rugged and dominating presence which garnered respect from his male peers. However, he suffered frequently from severe tooth decay, and ultimately lost all his teeth, but one. He had several sets of false teeth made which he went through during his presidency, none of which were made of wood, contrary to common law. These dental problems left him in constant pain for which he took laudanum. As a public figure, he demanded that his dentist keep his dental care absolutely private. Washington was an above-average equestrian early in life. He collected thoroughbreds at Mount Vernon, and his 2 favorite horses were Blueskin and Nelson. Fellow Virginian Thomas Jefferson said that Washington was the best horseman of his age and the most graceful figure that could be seen on horseback, and he hunted foxes, deer, ducks, and other game. He was an also excellent dancer and attended the theatre frequently. He drank in moderation, but was morally opposed to excessive drinking, gambling, tobacco smoking, and profanity. Colonial soldier. The death of Washington's brother Lawrence left vacant his position as adjutant general, and Washington began his pursuit of a military life inspired by Lawrence's service. He was trained in musters and drills. Then Robert Dinwiddie appointed him adjutant to the Southern District in December 1752. He was subsequently appointed to the Northern and Eastern Districts, as well. In February 1753, Dinwiddie appointed him to the rank of major at an annual salary of £100, then appointed him as British military ambassador to the French officials and Indians as far north as Erie, Pennsylvania when Washington was 21. Washington would later reflect in amazement 3 decades later that so young and inexperienced a person should have been employed in such negotiations. The British government had ordered Dinwiddie to guard British territorial claims in the Ohio River Basin, protecting trade activity with the Indians and others in the various settlements. Dinwiddie ordered Washington to deliver a letter in late 1753 asking French commander Jacques Legardeur de Saint-Pierre at Fort Le Boeuf to vacate the Ohio Valley, and offering him a safe escort to Lake Erie. Washington was also to make peace with the Six Nations. He and 6 frontiersmen reached the Ohio River that November, but the French had withdrawn. He met with Tanakarizon and other Six Nations Iroquois chiefs at Logstown and secured their support against the French if needed, and then continued 60 miles and met the French at Venango, but the letter was refused. Washington then reached Fort Le Boeuf and delivered the letter to the commander, who replied that Dinwiddie should send his demand to the Major General of New France at its capital in Quebec. Washington's diary of the expedition was printed by William Hunter according to Dinwiddie's order, giving Washington name recognition in Virginia and England. It also helped him obtain a commission to raise a company of men. French and Indian War. In 1753, the French military advanced into the Ohio Country, territory that both France and Britain wanted to claim. Virginia's Ohio Company was created to encourage British settlement of the land. It had an economic interest in the region, and both Dinwiddie and Washington were stockholders. The land which joined the Monongahela and Allegheny rivers was highly prized by both nations, and the competing stakes led to the French and Indian War and contributed to the start of the global 7 Years' War. It was Washington who ordered the first shot fired in that war in 1754. On March 15, 1754, Governor Dinwiddie commissioned Washington lieutenant colonel in the newly formed Virginia Regiment at age 21 and sent him to confront French forces at Pittsburgh. Dinwiddie ordered Washington to take prisoners, or kill those who resisted British control of the region. He set out on April 2 with 150 men, and received news en route that a French force had driven out colonial traders and begun construction of Fort Duquesne. Tanakarizon and a few warriors discovered a small detachment of French troops east of Uniontown, Pennsylvania led by Joseph Coulon de Jumonville, so Washington built an entrenched camp at Great Meadows which he called Fort Necessity. He then led his unit and their Mingo allies in an ambush against the French on May 28 in the Battle of Jumonville Glen. There are discrepancies, but primary accounts indicate that the battle lasted about 15 minutes. Jumonville was killed and most of his party were taken prisoner or killed, and Tanakarizon nicknamed Washington the Town Destroyer. In July 1754, the French responded by attacking Fort Necessity in a 10-hour battle which ended in Washington's only surrender and the return of his force to Virginia, but only after he signed a falsely translated surrender document saying that he had assassinated Jumonville. And this mistranslated document became the pretext to blame him for starting a war. Historian Joseph Ellis concludes that the episode demonstrated Washington's bravery and initiative, as well as his inexperience and impetuosity. Upon his return to Virginia, Washington refused to accept a demotion to the rank of captain and resigned his commission. This expedition into the Ohio Country had international consequences. The French accused him of assassinating Jumonville, claiming that Jumonville was only on a diplomatic mission. Both France and Great Britain were set to fight for control of the region, both sending in troops in 1755, and war was formally declared in 1756. In 1755, the British Crown sent General Edward Braddock and regulars to take Fort Duquesne. This was the largest British expedition to the colonies, intended to expel the French from the Ohio country. Braddock offered Washington the position of aide on his staff, and he accepted. Washington recommended that Braddock split the army into two divisions with a primary column and a second, more lightly equipped mobile offensive, flying column. During the march, Washington became severely ill and was left behind, but he was able to rejoin Braddock at Monongahela. The next day, the French and their Indian allies ambushed Braddock's divided forces, and Braddock was mortally wounded. The British suffered devastating casualties and retreated in panic, with two-thirds killed or wounded, but Washington rallied his forces in an organized retreat even though he was suffering from a fever and headache. He had two horses shot from under him, and his hat and coat were bullet-pierced. His conduct under fire redeemed his reputation among critics of his command in the Battle of Fort Necessity. Nonetheless, he was not included by the succeeding commander Colonel Thomas Dunbar in planning subsequent operations. On August 14, 1755, Dinwiddie appointed Washington colonel and commander-in-chief of all of Virginia's colonial military forces, to protect Virginia's frontier from Indian attacks. Washington was 23, in charge of defending 300 miles with only 300 men. Savage frontier battles took place, 20 battles in 10 months between Washington's Virginia regiment and the Indians. Washington desired to wear the coveted red coat of officer rank, but this eluded him. He was convinced that Braddock would have recommended him for a regular commission in the British Army had he survived, so he appealed to Braddock's successor Lord Loudon. Loudon refused the request, but did agree to transfer responsibility for Fort Cumberland from Virginia to Maryland. Washington's command increased to 1,000 soldiers, while he emphasized discipline and training. And Virginia's frontier population suffered less than that of other colonies as a result of his strenuous efforts. Ellis concludes that it was his only unqualified success. During the French and Indian War, Washington continued to advocate the capture of Fort Duquesne, and the British Crown sent commanding General John Forbes, Colonel Thomas Gage, and British regulars to take the post in 1758. Washington was promoted honorary brigadier general, while he and two regiments under his command were ordered to cooperate. During the Forbes expedition, Washington suggested using an Indian-style warfare method, but this was ignored. Washington was the only colonial officer among the British forces and was involved in only one battle during the campaign. Forbes had devised a plan for an assault on Fort Duquesne and assigned Washington to lead one of 3 brigades. He was alerted to an enemy reconnaissance party in the area and sent Colonel George Mercer and a contingent of several hundred Virginians to investigate. Gunshots were heard in the distance and Washington's unit responded, but they found themselves in a friendly fire situation when reinforcements also arrived, each contingent thinking that the other was the French enemy. This incident resulted in minor casualties. Forbes assembled 2,500 men in late November for the final assault on the fort, and he promoted Washington to honorary brigadier general to head the operation. Washington and his army arrived on November 25 to find the fort abandoned and burned. The British did score a strategic victory by gaining control of the Ohio Valley, but Washington retired from his Virginia Regiment commission in December 1758 and returned to Mount Vernon, while the French and Indian War was concluded in 1763 by the Treaty of Paris. Washington never gained the royal commission which he sought, but he acquired military, political, and leadership skills which proved invaluable during the American Revolution. Historians ascribe his support of a strong national government and a vigorous executive to his frustrations with officials in these and later interactions. He developed a distinct preference for regular troops over undisciplined militia, even though his command was limited during this war to smaller and more rural forces than during the Revolution. Brought to you by WikiVidi documentaries. Would you like to know more?